Thank you for coming here. I will try to be within my time limit of exposing this crime against humanity by the Iranian regime that happened in the summer of 1988. In late July 1988, the Islamic Republic's founder, Khomeini, handed down a fatwa ordering the massacre of political prisoners. The fatwa instructions were very simple. Any political prisoner remaining loyal to the PMOI or People's Mujahideen Organization was condemned to executions. Death commissions were formed in more than 70 cities across the country. The death commission constituted of 4 individuals, including a representative from the intelligence ministry. In the space of a few months, some 30,000 political prisoners who were serving their prison sentences, as young as 14 to 15 years old, and even pregnant women were put to death. In early August 2016, an audio file of Khomeini's former heir, Ayatollah Hossein Ali Montazeri, protesting to members, talking to the members of the Death Commission in Tehran, brought to light new dimensions of this massacre and shocked the Iranian society. For nearly 3 decades, Tehran had denied and tried to keep this massacre a secret. This has been changed. In order to keep the dimensions of this crime a secret and prevent a social reaction, even the bodies of the victims were not handed over to their families, and they were instead buried in mass graves across the country. Some former officials of the regime have admitted that more than 30,000 political prisoners were put to death during the massacre. As prominent human rights organizations, including Amnesty International and Human Rights Watch, have reiterated, what happened in Iran in 1988 was a clear case of crime against humanity. Passage of time will not affect the crime against humanity, and an inquiry is needed. But what makes the issue more relevant is the fact that scores of perpetrators and officials who were responsible for this crime against humanity are at the helm of things in Iran now and hold some of the most senior positions. According to the report of the UN Secretary General in September, 996 executions were recorded in 2015, which is the highest number in the past 20 years. According to information obtained by the National Council of Resistance of Iran, by sources from inside the country, most of institutions of the Iranian regime are run by the perpetrators of the 1988 massacre, whose names had remained secret for nearly 3 decades, and 60 of them in recent weeks have been identified. I have the list here. If anyone wants, I can share with you. Now, let's evaluate some of the key holders, and I'll try to be quick. The Supreme Leader, Ali Khamenei, was at the time president and a key decision maker. 4 current members of the State Expediency Council who were implicated in this crime were Ali Akbar Hashemi Rafsanjani, the council's chairman at the time. He was Speaker of the Parliament and Deputy Commander of the Armed Forces, and was de facto number 2 official after Khomeini. Ali Fallahian, who at the time was Deputy Minister of Intelligence and then became Minister of Intelligence, and Ghulam Hossein Mohsen Ejei was Judiciary's representative in the Intelligence Ministry. Majid Ansari was the head of the prisons at the time. So these are all now in the Expediency Council. 6 members of the Assembly of Experts were among the perpetrators of this crime, including Ibrahim Raisi, who was a member of this commission in Tehran. The judiciary is almost entirely infested with officials responsible for the massacre. Mustafa Pur Mohammadi, the current Justice Minister in Hassan Rouhani's cabinet, was the primary intelligence ministry official who was involved in the 1988 massacre. On August 28, he publicly boasted about his role in the massacre and called it God's order. And he was proud to carry the God's order. In addition to Justice Minister, National Council of Resistance of Iran has thus far identified 12 of the highest-ranking judiciary officials, including Hossein Ali Nayeri, the head of the Supreme Disciplinary Committee Court for the Judges, and he was judiciary representative at the time. The mass graves, the victims of were buried actually in all over the country in 70 locations. The National Council of Resistance of Iran has recently identified 12 mass graves. 8 of them are for the first time that are disclosed here. The existence and location of a number of these mass graves have been previously exposed, but one of the most famous and perhaps the largest one is the mass grave in the southern Tehran in a place called Khavaran. The National Council of Resistance has recently established details of 8 mass graves. These mass graves are in Mashhad, northeast Iran, Zanjan, northwest of Tehran, Kermanshah, western Iran, Somme Sara, northern Iran, Tonekaban, northern Iran. 2 new mass graves were found there, Dezful in southwest of Iran, and Bandar Gas. Now, the demand call on Canada, a UN inquiry is long overdue. As a first step, we urge Canada to include a reference to this massacre in line with the Canadian Parliament's unanimous motion in 2013 as a crime against humanity in the UN resolution on the situation of human rights in Iran. This will help to put an end to impunity by the Iranian regime's officials. Thank you.
Yeah.
Yes.
Go ahead.
Okay. Thank
Sure.
you. Thank you very much for inviting me to be here today. It's absolutely shocking to hear the number of current ministers who have been involved previously in this atrocity and who are currently ministers in the Iranian regime. Normalizing relations with Iran before these individuals are held accountable is completely unacceptable. This summer, I had the opportunity to attend the Free Iran Grand Gathering 2016 in Paris in support of the movement to bring democracy and freedom to the people of Iran. There were tens of thousands of people there. There were over 500 Iranians from Canada who were there as well. The current regime under Hassan Rouhani is a brutal one that needs to be stopped. Dissidents in Iran are imprisoned and in some cases executed. Even minors have been executed. Women have no rights. They are treated as property. If we want to stand up for women's rights in Canada, we need to start by standing up for women's rights in Iran and not normalizing relations and the kind of behavior that they exhibit. Religious freedom is non-existent. If we want to stand up for Islams and Christians and Sikhs and religious freedom, we need to start by standing up against religious oppression in Iran and not normalizing relations with this country, with this regime. We closed our embassy in Tehran when our conservative government was in place because we were strong in our dealings with the Iran regime. It's very worrisome. It's very worrisome, and I'm passionate about this. As a member of Parliament for the riding of Portage-Lisgar, I'm passionate about this, and it's very concerning to see the normalization of the relationship with Iran. It's unwise foreign policy on the part of Stéphane Dion and the Liberals. I will continue to speak out on behalf of those in Iran who cannot speak for themselves. As Canadians, we are blessed to live in this country. We cannot take it for granted, and we have to speak up for those in Iran who want freedom and deserve freedom. Thank you.
I'm Michael Cooper, Member of Parliament for St. Albert, Edmonton, and I'm very pleased to join my colleagues as well as members of the Iranian-Canadian community to stand in solidarity to commemorate the victims of the mass murders of political prisoners that took place in the summer of 1988. Some 30,000 men, women, and children were massacred during that bloody summer in Iran. Some of the victims were pregnant women and children as young as 15 years of age. And while the summer of 1988 is nearly some 30 years ago, we must not forget, and we can never let up until justice is brought to the victims and their families by seeing that the perpetrators of massacres that are among the largest since World War II are held accountable and brought to justice for the enormity of their crimes. And I would just reiterate, in the current present context, I will and my colleagues in the Conservative opposition will continue to call upon the Prime Minister to reevaluate his ill-advised policy of normalizing relations with the Islamic regime. If the lessons of the summer of 1988 teach us anything, it is that the Iranian regime is anything but normal. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm James Bazan, Member of Parliament, Selkirk, Interlake, and Eastman. Very proud to be here, standing with my colleagues and Shram Goldenstaw, my friend, and David Kilgore for the work that they've been doing on this for so long. And I want to thank the families that are here to talk about the reality that they still live with because of the brutal dictatorship that occurs in Iran, and how the Fatah of 1988 resulted in the murders of 30,000 people. I want to thank the National Council of Resistance in Iran, the NCRI, for their work in continuing to expose this atrocity, finding the names of those that were murdered because of their political beliefs, because of their religious beliefs, and essentially were political prisoners that were executed en masse in the summer of 1988. We can never let those names be forgotten, and we have to hold those to account. Now, one of the ways that this government can do that is to support my private member's bill for the Sergei Magnitsky Act. Now, this is about taking action against those corrupt foreign officials who commit these atrocities and making sure that they cannot benefit from their lifestyle that they have in their country. So it doesn't matter if they're in Iran or in China or in Saudi Arabia or in Russia. We have to go after them under the Special Economic Measures Act. We have to go after them under the Immigration and Refugee Act to ensure that they can't travel, that they can't use funds in other countries, and can't come here to Canada in particular, as we do see people from Iran that are tied to this regime and benefit from our education systems, our financial institutions, and the security that we have here in Canada. So we do have a real responsibility to take the step forward and to go after those that are responsible for the atrocity of 1988, and for those that are still committing atrocities that we see today in the Islamic Republic of Iran. So if you look at President Rouhani, and as was already pointed out by Shram, executions under this president has gone up exponentially, the highest levels that we've seen in 20 years. And we must, as Canadians, don't be fooled by the one good gesture that they made recently in having Professor Hoodfar being released and come back to Canada. All they're trying to do is buy political leverage at the UN, but Canada needs to take a strong position there to ensure that we can have the international investigation into this massacre, and also to make sure it comes before the International Criminal Court at The Hague. So we'll continue to stand with all Iranian Canadians, as well as all those in Iran that really long for a free and democratic Iran.
Thank you. Oh, we have thank you. I have on behalf of the Canadians Friends of a Democratic Iran, I have a statement which is over there. We're extremely short of time, so I agree with everything that's been said here up until now. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Ahmed Hassani. I'm living in Ottawa for the last 29 years. My dear brother, Mahmoud, born in 1960, is one of the victims of massacre in 1988. He was studying economy in University of Tehran when they arrested him and kept him in prison. He was sentenced to 10 years. They kept him for 7 years, and he suffered all kind of tortures. And with the Khomeini's fatwa, he got executed, amongst other 30,000 people. This is his picture, and he was my dearest little brother that I love so much, and I never forget the good memories that I had with him. And they called my other brother, my bigger brother, from Evin prison after his execution to come over. We have some news for you. He went there. They blindfolded him, took him to the prison, and the guy the other side of table told him, your brother was a good guy, but because he hasn't changed his mind about political views, we had to kill him. That's their reasoning. And they told him, you are not allowed to get any ceremony or tell anybody. And up till now, we still don't know where they buried him. And just want to make sure that my other brother is here in Ottawa too. There are witnesses. Mr. Gamrudi's brother, could you please stand up? Was executed at the same time in Iraq, another city, and his brother Manucher was executed the same way. Just a short memory of what happened in prison. Once I remember 30-some years ago, I was back there. I took my mom to a visitation. When she came back from prison, she didn't talk to me. And I push, why you don't talk to me? What's happened there? After 15 minutes, I was driving back home. She started crying and shaking and said, I didn't recognize my own son. That much he was tortured, that the mother couldn't recognize his own son. And just to share this memory that in that 7 years, what has happened to these guys, and then they got executed. As the other speakers demand, we demand that Canadian government that we are proud of because they are always in forefront of human rights around the world. When they draft a resolution this year for United Nations, they please note this event as a crime against humanity and try to pass it through United Nations and bring those who participated in this crime to justice. Thank you.
Any questions from the media?
Répétez en français.
Oui, bien sûr.
Qu'est-ce que vous demandez exactement au gouvernement canadien? Qu'est-ce qu'il devrait faire aux Nations Unies?
Ce que nous demandons, c'est actuellement en fait, parce que maintenant nous avons les nouvelles évidences autour de ce massacre, nous demandons que Canada, dans la résolution qui normalement, dans les 14 dernières années, Canada était le leader pour obtenir la résolution contre la situation de droits de l'homme en Iran. Nous demandons que Canada fait une référence sur le carnage de 1988 et demande que la culture d'impunité actuellement ne sera pas le cas pour les officiels iraniens. C'est le premier pas pour obtenir actuellement une investigation internationale par l'ONU et les autres organisations internationales sur ce crime contre l'humanité.
C'est inquiétant que le gouvernement canadien veuille normaliser ses relations avec l'Iran.
Bien sûr, comme nos collègues ont dit ici, on doit faire n'importe quelle normalisation avec le régime iranien conditionnellement d'abord un arrêt sur les exécutions qui sont couramment en cours en Iran et d'autres pour une amélioration significative des droits de la personne en Iran. On doit faire conditionnellement aucune normalisation de relations sur ce sujet-là.
The answer to the previous question, are you of the same opinion?
Sorry, I couldn't hear you.
The normalization of relations with Iran, just in English.
Yes, the normalization, I was just saying that any country, including Canada, who wants to improve relations with Iran, it has to be conditional upon an end to execution and a significant improvement on human rights. That is the litmus test for all our claims after the Second World War, that human rights is our motto, is our dream for the Western countries and Canada as a leader in the human rights issue. So these are the two significant factors, and I'm very glad to hear, James, that about the new acts of oppressive regime, basically. I very much support that.
So are you asking the government to not normalize relations?
As long as these executions continue and as long as there is no improvement, absolutely.
Just to follow up on that one, I mean, most, you look at most of our allies around the world right now, Britain, Germany, the UK, or the US, sorry, they're all moving towards engaging more, re-engaging with Iran, having their businesses really kind of getting into the market there and that. If Canada were to not engage and to kind of take a step back from this proposal of normalization, I mean, what could we do alone when some of the biggest economies in the world, the most influential political players, are working with Iran?
Yes, I'll give you a brief example. In 2003, when Canada introduced actually human rights resolution after the ordeal of Zahra Kazemi's case, I remember in those days, again, we were enjoying very high relations with Iran, and unfortunately they killed one of our citizens. Besides that, at the time, many policymakers were suggesting, what Canada can do. And what we were pushing, and this was proved over time and again, that if we take the lead, we can convince even our allies to follow us. We should not always follow our allies. We can be the leader and our allies can follow us, especially when it comes to the human rights. We can convince that moderation in this regime is an illusion. You just look at the UN Secretary General report just past September, which is not even a few weeks old, that the number of executions in 2015 in Iran has skyrocketed more than the past 20 years, 996 on his record, and there are many more that are not reported. So what Canada can do, we can convince our allies with like-minded countries, with like-minded parliaments, to push for a human rights-based policy approach.
To be fair, though, the former government did do that. They did cut off relations. They did speak very, very strongly on the world stage about the need to not engage with Iran and to really back off from that. And the U.S., all of our allies went and signed a nuclear deal, and they really went in and went hard to reestablish relations at the time when we were pulling back. So I guess what evidence is there to suggest that if we back away now, others will follow when they didn't before?
I cannot foresee what the future would look like. However, I know that even on the human rights issues, even not having, and if anyone else from my guests want to answer, they're more than welcome. I do not want to be. Sure, go ahead.
Sorry. I would just say that we should be under no illusions about the character of this brutal regime in Iran. This is a regime that continues to call for the destruction of Israel. It is a regime that is conducting a bloody war in Syria as we speak. It is a regime that is providing money and arms to Hezbollah. It is a regime that is continuing to develop ballistic weapons in direct contravention of UN Security Council Resolution 2231. And with respect to the issue of the P5+1 nuclear agreement, there is now evidence that, in fact, the Iranian regime is continuing to enrich uranium in direct contravention of that agreement. We should be under no illusions with the Iranian regime, and it's time for the Prime Minister to stop listening to the Iranian regime's words and start judging them by their actions.
On that point, though, what is there to suggest, though, that obviously that there's hugely problematic elements here. The regime, it's undeniable that there are atrocities going on there. But just specifically, from the government point of view or from the opposition point of view, if you're calling for the government to back away, what would you be? What I guess rationale do you have to expect that others would follow us as well and support us in that move?
Let me have a go with that. Just I want to add one thing about South Africa. In the 1980s, Canada's finest hour in the view of many people when it stood virtually alone against the UK and US, standing up against the apartheid regime in South Africa. and eventually, of course, democracy came to South Africa. So we don't always have to go with like-minded countries and with like-minded elements.
Yeah, and I would just add to that, if you judge the Iranian regime on their actions since the P5+1 agreement and nuclear disarmament, is that they've continued to show that they're not a responsible partner. So we do sometimes have to go it alone, because too often countries like Iran and China and Russia will say, well, you know, Canada has a relationship with us. They're the world leaders on human rights, or one of the world leaders, and they actually use our support of relations with them as a tool to explain why they can get away with committing so many atrocities. Too often regimes and dictatorships like we see in Iran use our friendship and often see that as weakness, that we're prepared to accept them on the pretense of what they already have done, and they'll always up the game and escalate the atrocities as well as how they beat down on civil rights.
Though that you can have more influence with Iranian government if you're actually talking to them rather than just not talking to them.
So since we've had a change in government, and since they opened up negotiations and discussions with the Iranian regime, we now have almost 1,000 people being executed every year because of their political beliefs, religious beliefs, because of whether they're LGBTQ community. Those people are targeted and executed systematically, and we can't turn a blind eye. So I do encourage the government to take a hardline stance. I believe, personally, that we have to go after the individuals, because people within the government of Iran need to have that freedom. They crave to have the same type of lifestyles that we enjoy in democratic countries around the world. And as long as they have a rigged political system that's all answering to the supreme leader, Khomeini, we'll never see a true democracy, and we'll never see civil rights brought into place there that they so rightly deserve. I think that's good enough. Thank you.